Hello, my name's Vince Sheehan, and today I'd like to talk about Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And I'd like to go through this great work, first published in 1866, exploring the structure of the plot as well as many of the themes that crop up in this great text. Now, I suppose if you could sum it up in a sentence, it would be something like one man's torturous journey of repentance and salvation after committing 2 murders. The book is in 7 parts with an epilogue. So in part 1, we're introduced to Rodion Raskolnikov, who is this young, intense, poverty-stricken ex-student. He basically does little all day except lie in bed and think. He is malnourished, he lives in kind of the slums of St. Petersburg, and is clearly in a fragile mental state. Now, Raskolnikov is highly intelligent, bookish, somewhat self-obsessed as well, and perhaps delusional. And he comes to the conclusion that it's perfectly justified to murder this moneylender, Alina Ivanovov, who's this old lady who kind of sponges off the weakest and poorest people in St. Petersburg. She's not a nice character, and he feels that the world will be better off without her. And all it takes is just a bit of courage, as Napoleon would do, or Julius Caesar, someone like that, just to take this lady out of people's way. And sure enough, Raskolnikov, he knows that she's going to be alone. He waits for her and kills her with a hatchet. A premeditated, cold-blooded murder. But completely unplanned, and to confuse matters, the moneylender's sister, Elizabeth, turns up, who has these learning difficulties. And Raskolnikov has to kill her as well. Raskolnikov exits the scene and escapes the building. It's also in this first part that Raskolnikov meets a drunkard called Marmeladov, and we're introduced to his sister Dumia and his mother. Dumia is betrothed to this guy called Lushin, who seems to be an altogether disreputable figure, very unlikable, and Raskolnikov detests him. And this engagement between his sister and this guy really seems to cause Raskolnikov all kinds of anguish. Part 2 is really all about the fevered and disturbed psychological state of Raskolnikov in the wake of these murders. Raskolnikov, actually, the name refers to a kind of someone being pulled apart. That's the kind of root of his name in terms of its etymology. And Raskolnikov becomes very sick. He has these feverish dreams, and he's looked after by his friend Razumikin, who's a kindly and loyal presence in his life. And he's also visited by a doctor, Zosimov. And they're discussing these murders, his friend Razumikin and Zosimov, and they note how Raskolnikov, his ears seem to prick up on his bed when he hears about these murders. It's here also that Raskolnikov really lets fly his feelings about Lushin, this guy who wants to marry his sister, and in no uncertain terms tells him to clear off out of St. Petersburg. He's actually on the verge of admitting to the murders, but he kind of stops just in time, and this drunkard who he met in part 1, Marmeladov, he is run over and killed. And Raskolnikov has inherited some money. This isn't anything to do with the murders and the belongings of this moneylender who he hid. But he receives this money, and he gives this money just to this widow of this guy who's died. And that kind of gives Raskolnikov a brief respite from the hell he's going through. He gets even perhaps a glimmer of joy through this act of generosity. In part 3, Raskolnikov is forced to confront the fact that people suspect that he is the murderer, and in fact somebody outright accuses him of being the murderer. And there's this guy Razumikin introduces him to. This guy works for the police, and he is his name's Porphyrius, and he really knows, he strongly suspects Raskolnikov is the murderer. And in this disarming, slightly bumbling way, he begins to get under Raskolnikov's skin through his questioning, and Raskolnikov grows to detest this guy because I suppose he fears him actually, because he knows that he is getting to the bottom of what's going on here with these murders. It's here that also Razumikin begins to draw close to Dumia, Raskolnikov's sister, who of course is betrothed to this guy called Lushin. Right at the end of this path, this mysterious stranger accuses Raskolnikov directly of murder whilst he is wandering the streets, which only adds to Raskolnikov's sense of spiritual dislocation and isolation and paranoia. In part 4, the heat is taken off Raskolnikov slightly, because this guy who was present at the scene of the murder, although he had nothing to do with it, Nicola, confesses to the murder unexpectedly, just as Porphyrius is turning the screw in his rather friendly and unassuming way on Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov, of course, is completely thrown by this, as is Porphyrius, the police detective. It's here that Lushin, Dumia's suitor, completely disgraces himself, and he's kind of cast out from the family circle, so that engagement's broken off. Raskolnikov has got very close to this girl called Sonia, who was this guy Marmeladov's daughter. Remember, he was the guy who was killed, and Raskolnikov gave his money to the widow. Well, the daughter, who was kind of forced into prostitution due to the poverty of the family, she draws close to Raskolnikov, and Raskolnikov can kind of sense that he can perhaps share some of his anxieties with her. And she was a friend of the woman who was murdered, Elizabeth, along with the moneylender. So he says that he will reveal who the murderer is. And there's this shady guy called Zvidrigayov who's listening behind a wall as he lives in the same block of apartments, of rooms as Sonia. So this guy has some power over Raskolnikov. In part 5, Raskolnikov confesses to Sonia. He comes clean about the murders. And he's certainly not filled with remorse yet, but he feels he has to tell her that he's committed these murders, and he still has this kind of insulation of justification around these terrible acts. Part 5 really focuses also on Marmeladov's widow, Catherine Ivanova. And with the money Raskolnikov's given her, she has this lavish meal where all these misfits in the kind of the slum tenement are invited. I mean, she's completely destitute. She needs the money for her children, for instance, but she feels that she has to make this show of this largesse and have these people round to enjoy this meal. And this is quite a darkly comic part of the book. However, in this part also, Lushin feels that he wants to kind of get his own back on Raskolnikov. So he tries to disgrace Sonia, the daughter of the widow and Raskolnikov's close friend by now. He tries to disgrace her by accusing her of stealing 100 rubles. But he is revealed as being a complete lying scoundrel by his roommate, Lebetyanikov. In part 6, which is just one chapter long, Catherine Ivanova, who is by now out of her mind, actually insane, dies. And Zvidrigayov reveals to Raskolnikov that he knows everything because he's overheard the confession. And Raskolnikov begins to greatly fear this character. And he has some power over Raskolnikov. Zvidrigayov is also interested in Raskolnikov's beautiful sister, Dunya, wants to marry her. And Raskolnikov fears that he will use this knowledge of his crimes as leverage to get what he wants, his sister. In part 7, Raskolnikov finally confesses to the police. Porphyrius urges Raskolnikov to confess his sins, to find some peace. Porphyrius knows that it's only a matter of time before Raskolnikov can bear it no longer and offload his guilt to the authorities. Zvidrigayov, it turns out, is actually betrothed to this other girl, although he does try and force himself on Dunya, and she manages to repel him. However, Zvidrigayov goes off and commits suicide after these tortured dreams he has in this vermin-ridden room he hired for himself. Raskolnikov himself is suicidal, but he bids farewell to his mother, who never really knows the truth, his sister Dimia, his friend as well, Razumikin, and he finally goes off to the town square. He prostrates himself, kisses the earth in a gesture of guilt, and he goes to the police and finally confesses all to Elia Petrovich, nicknamed Powder, or Gunpowder, because of his temper. Sonia sticks with Raskolnikov and follows him. And then we move to the epilogue. Raskolnikov now is in his punishment. He's in Siberia, in prison there, in terrible conditions. Sonia has followed him and has begun life as a seamstress. And she becomes well liked by the other inmates because she helps them write letters and things, although Raskolnikov doesn't give her much attention. Until one day, after he hears that his mother's died, Raskolnikov sits down in the grounds and she sits down next to him, and he realises he loves her. And that changes everything for Raskolnikov. All of a sudden he has hope, and he realises that his heart has changed. It seems that he comes to terms with his guilt. He's ready to start a new life, even bearing the sufferings of prison with a sense of joy that his soul is somehow alleviated from this guilt because he knows that he's been forgiven, it seems, and he has some hope of redemption, of salvation. So what are we to make of the themes in this novel? Perhaps chief amongst them is the notion of imprisonment and freedom. Raskolnikov has created a hell for himself. He's kind of locked in this nightmarish existence of his own making. And no matter how he justifies his crimes, he knows at his core that something is awry, and it takes him the course of the novel to accept this. Even if he lacks contrition in his confession, which he does initially, you know that he feels that he has to let this out somehow to get a sense of freedom, even if paradoxically that means serving his time in jail. So it seems that the idea of freedom that comes from repentance is key in this novel. And my goodness me, I mean, there's so much human darkness and depravity in this novel. But you know that there is a way out through this kind of self-examination, confession, repentance. And that's how Raskolnikov at the close of the novel feels that sense of joy and hope for the future. And interestingly, there's a kind of shadow double of Raskolnikov in the novel, Zvidrigayov, who doesn't make that change. Indeed, he ends up killing himself, a path which Raskolnikov almost went down himself. So you get a sense that through some kind of choice, these characters can come to terms with their failings, their frailty, their sins, if you like, and somehow turn things around, begin a new life. So that's central in this novel. Raskolnikov also epitomises the intellectual hubris of kind of fashionable intellectual trends of his day. Dostoevsky, as he does in his other novels at the time, seemed to be critiquing this kind of prevailing nihilism or kind of burgeoning socialism. Any attempts to kind of promote human progress divorced from the divine, divorced from God. And you can very much see that in Raskolnikov. His ideologies, his kind of Nietzschean kind of delusion of self-grandeur, that he is somehow a Superman who has the power and the will to be amoral and to kill because he has reasoned that that is a good thing to do. He has this arrogance about him, which Dostoevsky seems to lampoon somewhat obliquely through Raskolnikov. And also Lushin's roommate, Lebeziatnikov, who is this kind of hard left thinker, you know, whose ideas seem to get short shrift, certainly from the narrator of this novel. So Raskolnikov has his ego kind of stripped away from him. I heard someone say, like a kind of the layers of an onion kind of being peeled away, and Porphyrius helps him in this, doesn't he? And until his guilt and his shame is bared, and he has to make that confession. So I think there's definitely this idea that human vanity can only get us so far. There has to be some sense of morality beyond us. And I think that's something lurking at the background of this novel. Now, of course, other subsidiary themes include suicide, murder, of course, poverty, alcoholism, marriage proposals, dreams, nightmares, all these things you find in other Dostoevsky novels as well. But whenever I read this book, I've read it a few times now, I'm always drawn back to the very end, where Raskolnikov turns his life around after he realises he loves Sonia. They tried to speak but could not, and tears stood in their eyes. They were both pale and ill, but in those white and worn faces already beamed the dawn of a restored future and full resurrection to a new life. Love and affection rose upon them. The heart of one held within it an eternal store of light and love for the heart of the other. They resolved to wait and have patience. For him there still remained 7 years of much pain and suffering, but so much happiness. He was saved. He knew it and was conscious fully of his renewed being. And she was part of his life. It seems in this novel there's so much misery, but then you get this joy at the end, and it seems this joy, this sliver of joy at the end of this book, these pages of joy, a couple of pages at the end, seem to outweigh the bulk of this in some weird paradox in an amazing way. And I think that's what makes this novel truly exceptional, is the way all of a sudden his life just floods with love and a renewed life and optimism, despite the crimes he's committed, despite his pride, despite his arrogance, and despite the squalor and degradation of his surroundings and the failings of the people around him. So there we go, Crime and Punishment, a great novel. Of course, you don't need me to tell you that, but if you haven't read it, I recommend you do, and let me know what you think of this novel in the comments below. All the best. Bye.